about this book, let me first say that, like every book I've written so far, I wrote this one because I was mad nobody else had written it. So like Carl said, there are quite a few books on incense out there, and I feel like many of them are not very good. So what I really wanted to do was, this book really came out of my frustration when I first of all, let me apologize for wearing sunglasses. I just forgot to bring not sunglasses with me, and I'm completely blind without them. So I'm not just trying to be cool here. You'll see by the end of this talk, I'm definitely not that cool. But I was really frustrated when I read other people's recipes. I'd read them and I'd be like, why is there cinnamon in this recipe? And there was like no explanation of why they had chosen the ingredients they had chosen, which sometimes did not, at least to me, make sense why they had picked these things. So my big goal in this book was to like teach, or the other thing is online you'll often see like, you can use rosemary as a substitute for any other herb. Like no, my brothers and sisters in witchcraft, you cannot. Like if a cook told you that you could use rosemary in substitution for any other herb, you should not eat anything they cook. And that's also how I feel about incense. Like, you cannot. But you can substitute. I will say Scott Cunningham is where that advice came from, and I love Scott Cunningham, but I do not love that piece of advice. And so I really wanted a book that would, like, sort of walk people through, like, how those of us who do make our own incenses, like, how we're making these decisions about what is in each recipe, so that, as, like, a sort of an object lesson in how to make your own, right? So the book technically has 3 parts, but the first part, I'll tell you, is only there because my publisher demanded I put a part in there. But that's everybody's favorite. There's a piece about, like, how the science of smelling, which I feel like is 6th grade science that y'all were supposed to already learn, but is apparently everybody's favorite section of the book. But for the most part, the book is in 2 sections. The first one is about 100 ingredients. They're grouped by roughly, like, sort of botanical categories. And I talk about, like, their individual properties. And when I think about properties of a plant, I think of them as having sort of, like, 3 categories of properties. So the first one are things I think about as, like, essential properties. So when, like, not humans are thinking about this plant, what properties does that plant still have, right? So, like, what role does it play in the ecosystem? Like, its basic sort of, like, chemistry, how does it, like, interact with other plants, with other wildlife, how does it grow, those sort of things. And then I think of as, like, human-centric qualities, which is, in terms of incense, mostly about, like, how that biochemistry interacts with human biology, right? So medicinal properties, like frankincense elevates mood, those sort of properties. And then you have, like, cultural properties, right? So, like, frankincense smells like church, and that brings up, like, a whole complex set of symbolism that comes with it. But all plants have those sort of, and all things have those kind of categories of symbolism. And by talking about those, you can learn their magical virtues from those more, I don't want to say mundane virtues because, I don't know, like the fact that frankincense elevates the mood and connects you with the divine is a chemical property of frankincense, and I would not call that mundane in any way, right? But it's not, like, explicitly a magical property, right? And it's particularly important for those of us who live in the Americas, which I understand is not most people here, but, like, our native botanical lore, especially in the East, the Northeast where I live, is almost entirely lost. Lost as if, who knows how that happened? We murdered everyone who knew about it, is how that happened. And by we, I mean the English. You know, to be clear. So it's hard to learn, right? But those properties, they're part and parcel of the other properties. Like, magical virtues are not something separate from other plants. So, like, if I didn't know that pomegranates were associated with the great goddess Persephone, I would know that because they can be used to induce an abortion, and therefore I know they're going to be sacred to witch queen goddesses and to, like, goddesses of death and rebirth, right? Because the magical virtues of a plant are tied up in all the other virtues. So that's sort of the first piece of the book, is going through those ingredients. And I really chose to, like, go much deeper in a smaller number of ingredients, because I feel like if what you wanted is a giant encyclopedia of ingredients with 1 paragraph each, like, that's what Wikipedia's for, right? You don't need a book for that. And then this third half of the book, because I feel like there's only 2 halves plus some extra filler at the beginning. The third half of the book is recipes. And so the recipes are grouped more or less by, like, category. So some of them are offering incenses, some of them are incense tied to particular spells. there's a section on, like, reconstructing ancient recipes, which is surprisingly hard because plants are not the way they used to be, right? Like, humans have bred these plants for a long time. So, for one very particular example, like marijuana, which is legal where I live, but I understand not here, is in a lot of ancient incense recipes, and the marijuana we have today is not the same as what they were using in the Iron Age. And so you have to, like, really adjust all the quantities. But that is also true, like, it's more spectacular for, say, marijuana. My best friend is a professor of botanical medicine, and she will tell you that, like, marijuana is the hot place to be in plant genetics right now. But that is true for all human, like, usable plants, right? Cinnamon is also a very different plant than Mother Nature made it. Like, we have bred it. And that means when you're looking at particularly ancient recipes, you have to adjust all the quantities to sort of account for that. And that's sort of the last section of the book. So my goal is that by the end of that section, when you read my recipes, like, you're empowered to make up your own recipes for any use, and to, like, look at somebody else's recipe and make substitutions, either because you don't have things on hand, or because, like, you just want to tweak it to be kind of your own thing. And that's basically how I think of that book. Like, that's what that book is designed to do. So before I talk about some particular incenses, does anybody have any questions they want to ask? It's really just an excuse for me to take a sip of water.
Where does the word incense come from?
Well, I would imagine it's from, like, incendiare, like, to burn, in Latin. That seems true. I'm going to say that. If anybody wants to correct my Latin, but that feels like it must be true. That's a good question. You'd think I would know that, but I don't. Anything else? Oh, one other thing. So while this book is for incense recipes, any recipe in this book could be easily adapted to sort of any other kind of, like, herbal potion, right? So you could, for example, these same recipes, you could make them with, like, essential oils. Now, when you change from, like, whole... So all of my recipes are designed for whole plant materials. If you switch to, like, essential oils, you probably are going to want to play with the proportions, because some things come across stronger in oil than they would in whole plant, and etc. So you have to play with the proportions, but roughly, like, all of these recipes will work. And the other thing is, like, incense isn't like baking, where maybe you have to have the proportions pretty close to right because, I don't know, magic chemistry. You can tell I don't bake. Like, some kind of magic chemistry is taking place. But incense, the truth is, if you take things that smell nice and mix them together and light them on fire, they're probably still going to smell nice. And that's really the essence of incense making, is it's stuff that smells pretty when you burn it, right? So I almost always only make like whole material incense that I burn over charcoal or on an electric. So for ritual, I usually burn over charcoal because I really like the big, like, clouds of smoke. But for just, like, every day I want it to smell pretty, I usually use an electric incense burner at my desk. If there's anything else I want to say. I hate incense sticks, personally. I just think they're messy, and they often have, like, unsavory chemicals in them. But you can also make sticks, right? So any recipe in this book, if you grind it down to a fine powder, and then basically you buy, they're called punks, like the wood sticks that are in the middle of an incense stick. Most of my recipes have enough resin in them that you don't actually have to mix other things in, but depending on the recipe, you can basically mix a little bit of other stuff in to get the stick. And you just get it a little wet and, like, roll the stick in it. And then it's an incense stick. But again, I just think sticks are, like, the messiest, most terrible way to burn incense. You could also form cones instead of sticks. So today we're going to make an incense for the moon, right? So if you look at your handout, we're on the page with the QR code on it. Let me look at the other page. The other page I honestly just put here because I had extra room. But okay, so let me talk a little bit about this, like, pantry at the top. So this is a question that I got asked a lot when the book first came out, is about, like, what is, like, the minimal sort of pantry of ingredients to keep on hand. And the first thing is, like, I would never advise you to, like, buy plant material. Okay, look. I bought plant materials on Amazon because I did not want to try and bring incense materials through customs, which just felt like big bags of herbs in my luggage was going to be a problem, right? Although, maybe not. I don't know. They searched my luggage anyway, so I guess I should have just brought it. But personally would always advocate, like, plants you grew or plants you wildcrafted locally are always going to be better for magic than something that you, like, bought off Amazon, which feels like kind of defeats the point of, like, a magical quest to find a rare ingredient if you just bought it off Amazon. And also, like, environmental costs. Like, that's fine. That being said, we're going to use all kinds of, like, not local things today because I flew across an ocean to get here. So, I did not bring you local things. So, I really love frankincense as a resin. Frankincense is certainly not local to here or where I live. And frankincense is not always harvested very ethically. So I do encourage you, like, if you buy frankincense, to, like, investigate who you are buying it from and, like, how they came by it. Frankincense also varies quite a lot in quality, right? So I'm going to go ahead and pass around a bag of frankincense so everybody can smell just like what raw frankincense is. But you can, almost all the time when you're using frankincense, you can substitute another resin. So where I live in the States, what I would substitute with is white pine, which I would imagine you guys also have here. I probably should have looked this up. Rob, do you know, like, a local resin?
Yeah, pine.
Pine, that's what I figured. Pine is, different kinds of pine are basically everywhere. Pine resin is lovely. So, like, not where I live in the States, but in other, like, in the Western United States, they have, like, pinyon pine that they use a lot. But pine resin can almost always be substituted for frankincense resin. Where I live, white pine is what Christmas trees are. So if you go to a Christmas tree lot and ask nicely, they'll let you. If I ask nicely, I'm adorable and charming, they will let me harvest resin. I don't know if that works for everybody or not. I mostly get what I want when I ask for things. Sandalwood, right, is a very traditional incense ingredient. Again, not always harvested super sustainably. I really like cedar also as a sacred wood. Cedar is generally relatively sustainably harvested. I don't have cedar with me for you guys to smell. Again, at least in the States, I think probably here too, wooden pencils are historically made from California incense cedar. So, like, that really good smell when you sharpen a pencil, that's incense cedar, actually. So some kind of resin, some kind of aromatic wood, right? The next one I would recommend is mugwort or some other kind of artemisia, which is indeed native here, but fully naturalized where I live as well. Like, it's in every roadside ditch. Rosemary is a great herb, right? For incense, I quite like rosemary, but really you can substitute rosemary for anything else in the salvia family, generally. Like, you know, how you substitute and why, you have to understand why that particular plant is being used before you choose a substitute. But broadly, the first place to start when you are choosing substitutes is to choose something from the same, like, botanical family, right? And so rosemary is a salvia, the same as, like, sage is. Most sages, I will say blue sage is actually an artemisia and not a salvia. Cinnamon, I love cinnamon. I put cinnamon in almost all my, that's not true. I use cinnamon in a lot of recipes. For cinnamon, you're better off getting cinnamon chips if you can. Very fine ground powders, like the level of powdered cinnamon you would get at, like, the grocery store, it can sometimes kind of spark when you burn it, and then little embers of flaming cinnamon are everywhere, and then you burn your incense workshop down. But here's a pro tip. If you have, like, a really fine powder that you want to burn as incense, if you just get it a tiny bit wet and, like, roll it into little pellets, it'll just slow the burn down a little bit so it burns a little better. Rose, I love rose and incense. Frankincense, cinnamon, rose is probably one of my favorite buns. Like, that's sort of what I just generally burn in my house a lot of the time. You have to be careful with roses that came from a florist, because at least where I live, they are frequently covered in poison. Like, they're covered in pesticides when you get them from the florist, and I wouldn't necessarily burn them. I certainly wouldn't burn them for the kind, like, at least in magic, sometimes I'm, like, wearing a scarf huffing the incense, and I wouldn't do that with florist roses. Your roses may be less covered in poison. Peppercorns. Don't burn ground black pepper over incense charcoal. You wouldn't think I'd have to tell people about that, but you're basically just pepper spraying yourself. But whole peppercorns, you can burn, because they burn pretty slow. I mean, they're spicy. They're quite martial, right? So we use them a lot in like malefic magic, or even like defensive magic if we want quite an aggressive kind of like fiery wall of protection style magic. Whole peppercorns. Don't burn ground pepper even if you get it wet and roll it into little balls. Ask me how I learned. See what else is on my list. So cedar, I talked about cedar wood, but I also quite like cedar needles, or almost any kind of coniferous needles. Okay, you should not burn. It's slightly toxic. Like yew trees. That being said, like, obviously I'm not telling you guys to poison yourself. That being said, yew is a traditional incense we use sometimes, particularly in Hecate work. I'm going to say, like, look, I'm not a doctor, and if you poison yourself, that's on you, not on me, not on Watkins. Please don't sue, right? But I think you'd have to burn really quite a lot of yew incense in a very, like, I wouldn't burn it in a closet, right? But if you're in a relatively big space, maybe open a window. I mean, I've burned it, and I haven't died yet. So, but really, almost any kind of conifer needles are all reasonably pleasant as incense, and they're all similar enough, right, that's a good place to start with a substitution, right? So if something calls for cedar needles, you might try substituting cedar wood, you might try substituting juniper needles, which are closely related, right? But you could probably substitute any kind of, like, coniferous green needle, again, without knowing what they're there for, right? Finally, like, whatever is local to you, like, whatever you are growing, consider that for incense. So anything you can eat will make a great incense, right? And most things you can. Like, if it smells good before you burn it, it's probably good in incense, too. There's really no way to discover that other than lighting it on fire and seeing what happens, which I recommend you do outside, just in case. Tree of Heaven, I lamp this. I'm not even sure if you guys have that here, truthfully. But if you do, I do not recommend burning it. It smells very bad. Very bad. And it makes your whole house smell very bad for a long time. No ailanthus trees. Finally, honey. I really like to bind incenses with honey. So basically, I grind in essence, there are two ways to make the kind of incense honey. The first is whole plant material, where you just kind of rough it up in your hands into little pieces and throw it directly on the charcoal. For ritual, I like that best, because I really like to not just set the incense burning at the beginning, but, like, continue to throw incense onto it, like, every time I say a mantra, or, like, every time I do this piece of a spell. And I like to be able to change the incense as I move through the ritual. Right, so I don't normally pre-mix incense for a ritual. I have, like, little bowls of all the ingredients, and I sort of throw them in kind of, I don't know, however the spirits move me to do through the course of the working, right? But to make incense for later use, you can grind it down to a powder. I recommend an electric coffee grinder for that, which I'm going to say do not expect to ever. Once you've ground frankincense in a coffee grinder, it's never going to not have frankincense in it again. It's, like, impossible to clean because it's sticky. So I just have a coffee grinder that's for that, right? And does that mean there's a tiny bit of frankincense in everything I make? It does, because I don't clean that grinder very well. Right? You can do it by hand with a mortar and pestle as well, which feels witchier until you're making incense like a pound at a time, in which case it starts to get really old. So, coffee grinder. So just grind everything down to a powder, and then I like to mix it with just enough honey to, like, get it to stick together. The honey adds the smell you would think it would add. I mean, it smells like honey when you burn it, but it also produces quite a lot of smoke, which, again, I like, because I like to do spirit evocation in smoke, because, you know, if you want a spirit to manifest physically, you need to give it some medium to do that in, right? And so you can do it with, like, oil on water, and you get, like, the swirly patterns, but I quite like smoke for that, and the honey produces a lot of smoke, and relatively light smoke, so it, like, moves around a lot. Any questions about anything I just said about ingredients? Alrighty, so we're going to go on to the other side of the worksheet now, right, where we're going to talk about this incense for the moon. So this is an all-purpose lunar incense for, like, getting in touch with moon vibes, basically, right? So you could use it for, like, an offering incense for the moon, for really any kind of lunar spirit, or really for, like, any work that is broadly kind of in the lunar category, right? So visionary work, dream work, let me think about how to say this. Sexual work that's sort of got like a gentle kind of vibe to it. So not a real like, martial kind of sexy vibe, and also not a like super romantic, like Venus-y vibe, right? But like, you know, nice wholesome sex. I don't know what that says about me, then I'm like, yeah, the moon sex, that's the good kind. Right? So I looked to the 3 kind of phases of the moon, right? So we're going to talk about the full moon, the crescent moon, by which I mean both the waning and the waxing moon, right? And the dark moon. And I've correlated those with the 3 worlds. So I'm going to talk about the 3 worlds for just a second, even though I'm going to imagine that most people in here sort of are already familiar with this 3 worlds cosmology. So 3 worlds cosmology is just a very sort of simple, relatively cross-cultural way to talk about, like, what I would just call the other place. There's here, and then there's, you know, the other place that you go when you journey, but also where you go on a trip, or like where you go in the dreaming, like the other place, right? Which of course is here. Like, I think metaphorically as humans, we talk about it as if we are traveling somewhere else, but we're simultaneously existing in all of these places. Really what we're moving, I think, is our, like, frame of consciousness. Like, what are we paying attention to, right? And right now, I'm paying attention to all of you here in the middle world with me, right? But I can move that attention to be elsewhere, right? So we talk about the upper world and the underworld, but really what we're saying is here where we are, you can go up or you can go down. But what constitutes up and down, that's really about our, like, human frame of reference, right? Like, I assume the angels consider this the upper level of hell, which feels pretty legitimate sometimes, right? And I would assume that denizens that live in the underworld think of us as living in the lower heavens, because we indeed do not live in the earth. We live in the bottom of the sky, right? And so, like, the framing of, like, upper world and underworld can carry a lot of, like, religious baggage in our culture, which some of that is real. Like, they are not identical. Like, when you go up, the things you meet up there are different than the things you meet when you go down. But, like, it's really, the fact that we live in the center is not a magical coincidence. We're the ones who decided where the center is, right? So here in the middle world, right, we think about sort of like the world of, like, living beings, right? Like ensouled creatures. So things that have bodies, and not just living bodies, right? So a river, that's a spirit that has a body. A mountain, that's a spirit that has a body, right? And so for the most part, a planet. So even, this is a little bit strange to think about, but the planets, like the actual physical planets, they're here in the middle world with us. And so, but even though, like, the sphere of Mars as a spiritual locale, shall we say, is in the upper world, like the physical planet Mars, that's part of the middle world, here where we have bodies, right? And so the plant we're going to talk about as we talk about the middle world is mugwort. So I'm going to pass around some mugwort. This bag's pretty full, so try not to spill mugwort all over their carpet. I'm sure they would not be happy if I get mugwort all over their carpet. So, like, I'm going to send it around. So send it around, smell it. You can pull out a tiny bit and, like, rub it in your fingers, right? And really, like, kind of catch the vibe, I will say, of this mugwort as we turn around. Right, so mugwort, as I mentioned, is an artemisia. It's Artemisia vulgaris. Okay, on your handout, I realize right here it says harvested on the property, but that's a total lie. That's from the last time I did this in Italy, where we did mugwort. So this mugwort sadly did come from Amazon, right? It's called mugwort because it was used to flavor beer, right? Shocking, I know. And it's really good for, it's sort of a chill out herb, I would say, right? So when you smell it, I think you'll smell that it's kind of like a dreamy, calming, like, I understand why you'd put that in beer. So the addition of hops for beer is a relatively recent phenomenon in the history of beer. It is historically flavored with mugwort, which I will say I do find a little surprising because it's not delicious. At least I find mugwort tea, honestly, somewhat unpleasant. Mugwort tea is quite good for dreaming. You can also smoke it from a pipe. You can also huff it. It's a really good healing herb, right? It calms the body, so it can calm down inflammation. It can calm down a rapid heart. Let me preface this. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, blah, blah, blah. Don't treat yourself with plants, blah, blah, blah. The Empire doesn't like it when we take care of ourselves. Please see an imperially approved doctor, etc. Okay. Mugwort can be used to induce an abortion, but it is a bad way to do that. So, like, if you would like to learn how to induce an abortion with herbs, I will teach you how to do that. Mugwort is not the go-to choice for that. Cottonseed is actually quite good for that. It's really good for the feet and legs. So Roman soldiers would historically layer fresh mugwort in their boots to, like, prevent marching fatigue, I suppose. And it's also really good for what would historically be called melancholy, but that can kind of describe a variety of things. So mugwort is not so good for treating, like, depression, but it's good for treating, like, anxiety or, like, agitation. Like, the kind of depression where you're sad and also mad. Mugwort's pretty good for that. Let me read you this. So this is from Woden's 9 Herb Charm. Remember, mugwort, what you revealed, what you established at the mighty proclamation. Una you are called. The first one. Una you are called, oldest of herbs. You may avail against 3 and against 30. You may avail against poison and against contagion. You may avail against the loathsome one who travels through the air. Right? So when I imagine the spirit of mugwort, like, as a human, I tend to anthropomorphize spirits, right? So most spirits that I think of are relatively human in form. When I imagine, like, grandmother mugwort, I'm imagining, like, an older European woman with, like, long gray-white hair wearing, like, a green dress. Sort of, like, vaguely old-timey ye old England style, probably. But as an American, where that really means, I don't know, anywhere between 1100 and 1500, anywhere in Western Europe. Right? That's what we think of as England, just so you know. Right? That's how I imagine her, is kind of in that form. She's a spirit I closely associate with another spirit that I would call, like, Grandmother Winter, right? Or even Frau Hulla, right? Mrs. Hell, I suppose, is what her name means. I mean, she's a Grimm's fairy tale character, so I think people probably know who she is, right? Does everybody feel like they kind of have a handle on mugwort and what that plant is like? Does anybody have questions about that?
So was it brought to the New World?
Yes.
So perhaps is this spirit as an echo of the people who probably brought it in the first place?
I would imagine.
Why would they have brought it?
To flavor beer with.
Make beer.
Oh, really? So,
yeah. I would assume. I mean, it's also a good healing herb, but I will also say that at least where I live in Pennsylvania, mugwort naturalized very well. So mugwort grows where I live in every roadside ditch, every, like, abandoned lot. Like, it's a very aggressive spreading plant. It's quite easy to grow, so, like, they didn't have to try very hard to introduce it. But I would assume it was brought for as a beer flavorant, but possibly also for medicinal uses.
Well, why was there? I mean, when did the hops sort of, you know, do hops have, like, a magical quality in that case as well?
Hops. Many people use hops in magic. People use hops a lot for dream magic. They're not my favorite. Though I will say it might be, I've never, like, interacted with a living hops plant. Like, I've never grown hops. As opposed to mugwort, which, as I said, grows everywhere. So I'm very familiar with that plant. I find it much harder to come to know the spirit of a plant if you only ever interact. Like frankincense, for example. I've also never interacted with a living frankincense tree. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a Boswellia tree, like, alive in real life. And so I find it much easier to connect with the spirit of a plant when I'm connecting with the living plant. I mean, I think in general it's easier to communicate with living things than dead things on account of being alive. Myself. Mostly. Right? So, but that's a good question. I think I am not a specialist in, like, the history of beer, but I feel like hops starts to be, like, take over the beer industry, probably in, like, the at least in the colonies. Probably not until, like, the mid-1800s, maybe. But I don't really know. Rob, do you know? That seems like something you might know.
It's slightly earlier, but yeah, it's not early modern.
Yeah.
It's sort of late 60s, 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
When a lot of shifts are happening.
Exactly. And so mugwort was really commonly used before that, as were a wide variety of other herbs. It's just, like, that's why it's called mugwort. Just because it's named after beer mugs. I believe that to be true. Any more questions about mugwort? Mugwort is just a fabulous witching plant. I use it all the time. It also has, I don't know if you guys noticed when I passed it around, it has like a really sort of interesting, like fluffy kind of texture that works quite well in incense. And also works pretty well in like dream pillows. Like, and if you grind it more than this is ground, it'll just get fluffier. Like, I honestly don't exactly understand what property of the plant is producing that, like, fluffiness. I think it has, like, I kind of do. When you look at the living plant, it has little, like, hairs on the leaves. Like, the leaves are slightly fuzzy. And I think that's probably what's happening when you grind it, is the fuzz fluffs up. So that is what we're associating with the middle world, with the crescent moon here where we are. Right? Frankincense, I know I already passed around. I'm going to pass it around again. This time, as I pass it around, I really want you to lean into understanding it as, like, with the full moon and the upper world, right? So frankincense, right, if you stick your hands in and, like, move them around, you'll be able to smell it still on your hands. This one's not as full. You don't have to worry as much about spilling it. So frankincense is a resin, right? Many people think that resin is dried sap, but it's not. Resin is a special fluid that plants make to, like, heal their wounds. So when you're looking to harvest resin, like, you want to look for, like, branches that have broken and the resin will have oozed out. Don't take all of it because the plant is using that. Like, the plant needs that to heal that wound. But in the sort of trees that from which we collect resin, so like frankincense or pine, they will really overproduce resin, and so there'll be, like, big globs of it dripping down. The plant's not using that. You can take that. A butter knife is usually the easiest way to peel it off. Again, I encourage you that you are never going to be able to use that butter knife for anything with frankincense ever again. It will never get clean. So you peel it off. Depending how fresh it is, it starts off as like a sticky fluid and eventually dries into hard tears like this. If you harvest it yourself fresh and dry it, it takes like 2 years to dry out to the really hard kind that we are accustomed to. But it's actually better. Like everything else, it's better fresh. Right, if you collect your own, but it's just sticky, and that makes it kind of hard to work with. Because of that, the way that the plant made it, right, as a wound healing salve, like, magically you can think of it that way. Like, magically frankincense is sunshine alchemized into bandages, right, by the virtue of a tree, a sacred tree, and, like, the magical properties of frankincense, I think, are really wrapped up in that. It's very good for healing. It's very good for, like, upper world communication. Almost all spirits, with the exception of certain kinds of chthonic spirits, underworldly spirits, almost everybody likes frankincense as a offering. So, like, if you're not sure what to burn, frankincense is definitely, like, a pretty solid go-to. It's quite hard to cultivate frankincense trees, right? Even in the modern world, but in the ancient world, there's a whole thing. So, like, there's a lot of writing in Egypt suggesting that they kept bringing frankincense trees to Egypt, but they just couldn't get them to grow. And that historically, frankincense trees were said to be guarded by dragons, right? Now, was that just like a rumor that the Yemeni frankincense merchants promulgated to make resin more expensive? That seems believable. But, like, frankincense is closely associated with dragons, and it kind of, like, smells draconic. I can get behind that idea, right? It's good for healing. It's good for inflammation, so you can take frankincense and make what we would call, like, frankincense water, which is you just put frankincense tears in water, and, like, shake it up and wait for a while, and the oil from the frankincense will slowly permeate into the water. It makes it, like, milky. You can rinse out your mouth with it if you have, like, sores in your mouth or other kind of, like, dental issues. It's really good for that. It's good for wounds generally. It's good internally to reduce inflammation. Again, I'm not a doctor, yada yada, but it's good to, like, reduce inflammation. And it's also, I think, just quite pleasant. Like, I like frankincense in most forms. I'll tell you, when I hurt my hip a couple years ago quite badly, I couldn't really walk. I mean, I still don't walk so good, but I really couldn't walk. And my body just, like, craved frankincense for a long time. And I didn't know it was used to treat, like, joint inflammation before that. Like, I found that out after my body was like, feed me frankincense. And I did, and it worked, right? You see if there's anything else that I'm supposed to be telling you about this. Okay, frankincense is one of the gifts brought to the baby Jesus by the 3 wise men. In some legends, they have names. Melchior is the one who brings frankincense. Frankincense is associated with, like, kingship, divine kingship, right? Frankincense, okay, I am told that frankincense will, like, repel pests and bugs. I will tell you that is actually not, having tried it, that is not really my experience. Like, maybe a little. I mean, any kind of smoke will kind of keep away bugs, but frankincense would not be my go-to for that. But that is a thing that it's widely... Many incense books will tell you that burning frankincense will keep away bugs, but I don't think that's accurate. At least the bugs I have at my house, it does not. They seem perfectly happy to be around frankincense. When I imagine frankincense as a spirit, I think I am actually imagining Melchior, right? So I'm imagining, like, a dark-skinned man and sort of like a old wise man from a nativity scene kind of get up with a golden box full of frankincense. Like, I'm pretty sure the spirit I am imagining as frankincense is probably just Melchior. I think that's really all I have. Anyway, any other questions about frankincense? I know I'm going kind of fast. It's because last time I did a talk here, it turned out I went way, way, way over time. So I'm trying to, like, keep things moving.
Have you had frankincense tea?
I have had frankincense tea. I actually like it better cold.
Yeah.
Like cold frankincense water. Iced frankincense water I quite like. Sometimes I put soda water in it, so it's bubbles. Yeah. Also, I know it's illegal here. I do sometimes smoke a bong through frankincense water, which I recommend. But obviously I would never tell you to do anything illegal. But it is legal where I live. I quite like it. It's good. Oh, one other thing that's interesting. So an old-fashioned name for frankincense is olabanum, which actually comes from the Hebrew lavana, which means, it really just means white, like white stuff. But it's very closely associated with the name for the moon, right? Which is one of the reasons I chose it. Because, you know, in our culture, we often think of frankincense as solar, right? So at first glance, it feels like an odd choice for a lunar incense. But that's what I mean about, like, some properties being more cultural, right? So, like, in Arabic and in Hebrew and Semitic cultures generally, frankincense has a much more lunar tone to it because it is understood to be associated with the moon because of its color, right? So this frankincense, I don't know where I got it back. Like, the frankincense I have is pretty yellowy, right? But much frankincense is a little lighter in color. Frankincense runs a gamut in colors, which is partly about the quality. It's probably about the exact tree. So technically, I would say frankincense comes only from the Boswellia sacra tree, sacred Boswellia. But in practice, when you buy frankincense, it is often from a variety of Boswellia trees, and different ones produce slightly different colors of resin with different scents to them. But a lot of the differences in color and quality are actually in, like, how it's dried, and like the same tree produces different grades of frankincense as well. And in general, the darker frankincense it's a little more stickier and thonic, and like the lighter it is, you tend to get a little bit of like a fruitier, more like sharper, clear scent out of it, which tends to be associated a little bit more with the upper worlds, those higher. Frankincense, the grading in frankincense, though, is not always about that difference. It's really just about how clean it is, which is really just about the processing of it, generally. And then in the underworld, right, we're going to talk about blue lotus. So blue lotus, obviously not a local plant either. Blue lotus is primarily from Egypt, although I think this blue lotus is maybe from India. It doesn't say where it came from. So I'm going to pass this around so you can see its flowers. They're like purple flowers. So I'm going to pass this one around. I'm actually going to pass all three around again, and I really want you to sort of like take a minute and like really smell them so you know what they each smell like individually, and really like take a second to like, let's say like put your own vibes into them, right? And then we're going to mix it together, and I have tiny bags so everybody can take a little bit of incense home with them. James, I'm going to put you in charge of passing herbs around. Okay. So Blue Lotus is not actually a lotus, it's a water lily. It's native to Eastern Africa. Like I said, we generally think of it as coming from Egypt, but it has a relatively extended range in northeastern Africa. It's an aphrodisiac, I am told, although I will say it doesn't feel... I having worked with it, like both ingested it and as an incense, I don't notice an aphrodisiac effect, but maybe I'm just a horny slut all the time, I don't know. Such a weird thing to say in front of my brother, sorry. I like forgot you were here. It's really good also generally for like divinatory work and like visionary sort of dream work. It's a very lunar sort of dreamy plant. It does have a quite noticeable like dreamy quality when you ingest it. Like it is quite... it's a drug. You can feel it take effect as you drink it. It also makes a very pretty color because of the blue color. Like when you brew it as a tea, you get that like a sort of pale blue colored thing. It's said to be good for pain relief. Again, I haven't noticed that effect, but I imagine maybe you just need to take more of it. But it is very like dreamy and relaxing. It's a good herb to like put you in the zone for magic, I would say. I would imagine that to get like a strong sedative or pain-killing effect, you'd probably need like a distillate, right? And not the whole... Like I think you'd maybe have to consume that entire bag worth to get that kind of effect, which I imagine you'd want to do in a distilled form, right? Magically, it's associated with the sun god Ra, so it's another like interesting choice. You'll notice that a lot of the lunar herbs I picked also have this sort of solar vibe to them, and that's generally the case, right? That solar and lunar energies tend to overlap a lot. Like most plants that have a lunar association will also have a solar association. So the lotuses that you see in like iconography that you see Ra arising out of, that's a blue lotus plant in those pictures. The spirit I see for blue lotus is like lion-headed. It's an Egyptian man, it's not Sekhmet, right? As soon as I say lion-headed in Egypt, people are like, oh, that's Sekhmet. I'm like, no, it's not. It's definitely a dude. And he's holding the Was-sceptre. So I see from faces that maybe not everybody knows what I'm talking about. So there are 3 scepters of power in ancient Egypt. There's the Ankh, right, which I think most people are familiar with, right? It looks like a loop and then a crossbar at the top. It's associated with life, right? It's power over life, right? Isis traditionally holds the Ankh, but so do many, many, many other spirits. Sometimes people will describe it as a mirror, but I think that's ridiculous because people are routinely holding it through the loop in images, so it can't be a mirror. Or a flower. Sometimes people say it's a flower, but again, it can't be a flower because you're holding it through the loop, right? The next one is the Jet. D-J-E-T, I guess, Jet, which is the power of like political power. It's like a spine, right? So it's a pillar, and then it usually has 3, sometimes 4 crossbars on it. Is that one? It is traditionally held by Osiris, but again, lots of other people as well. And then the Was-sceptre is hard to describe what it looks like. It kind of looks like the god Set, so it has like a curve coming out to like almost like a beak and little like ears basically, and then a forked tail at the other end. So the other 2 scepters of power, they're just a wand on the bottom, but the Was-sceptre has a forked tail basically on one end, right? So it's like a stang on one end, on the other end it has sort of like a hook. It's unclear what it represents, right? So some people will say it represents like the Set beast, but other people would say that a Set beast is an anthropomorphization of the Was wand, which some people say is a kind of midwifery tool. which feels believable. Like, looking at it, I can, like, that looks like antique midwife tools I've seen, right? But the creature that I see as, like, the anthropomorphic spirit of Blue Lotus is holding a Was-sceptre, right? And is usually wearing, like, blue, sort of the color of the Blue Lotus. Let me see if I'm supposed to tell you anything else about this. Oh, just one last thing, and that's that the petals of Blue Lotus close up at night, right? And I think of that as very similar to sort of like the inward going that you do during like magical trance, right? And that's one of the reasons that I really like Blue Lotus for that kind of inner work, is because the flowers themselves sort of pull in that way, right? So any questions about anything I have said so far?
I feel like a syrupy vibe from Blue Lotus.
Yes, I think that's fair. Blue Lotus does have a very, like, sensual, sort of like opium den stickiness to it. I mean, overall, these three plants together do have, all of them in some sense, have that kind of, like, sticky, sensual lunar quality, but I agree, Blue Lotus in particular. And indeed, it's often found in syrup form. You can use it as, like, a cough syrup. I mean, I wouldn't. Like, if I were going to make a cough syrup for someone, there are a lot of other things, cherry bark, that, like, I would use instead of Blue Lotus, but Blue Lotus is sometimes used in that context, right? So, as the plants go around, right, I think everybody over here has smelled all three. All right, so they're going to come around on this end, right? Really take a second and, like, smell them. Imagine the moon, right? And then we are going to mix them together. We can't burn them, right? I don't think we're allowed to burn incense here, I assume. I assumed I was not going to be allowed to burn things.
A little bit.
I mean, I don't have charcoal anyway. And,
No, we have some.
oh, do you? All right, well, maybe we'll burn a little bit for you. But I brought tiny little drug dealer size bags. So
So you did smuggle something.
I shipped them to my brother's house.
They've shipped from Swindon. It's very technical.
Oh, these are very little. These are littler than I thought they were going to be. It's because they were in metric, and I'm not very good at like imagining metric.
Quick question about the smoke, because obviously you're burning and this kind of could be toxic. So I'm worried
In general, particulates aren't great for your lungs.
No.
But I think that even for somebody like me who burns incense almost every day, like, it's still much less, like, a lifetime of burning incense, I think, is less particulate in your lungs than a pack of cigarettes, or than just the air. That, like, I think modern air pollution, at least look, I live almost next door to a coal-fired steel plant, so my air is maybe not that good to start with. So, yeah, I mean, some materials themselves are toxic, but in general, it is certainly the case that, like, huffing smoke is not good for your lungs. But I don't think, unless you're doing it really every day, kind of regularly, I wouldn't. Or you have some kind of underlying lung problem. I think it's not such a big concern.
Because I have like a little gadget to measure the air quality, and if you burn like traditional kind of incense, Indian one or whatever, and it's just the machine goes crazy. It's like, oh, so much, so volatile compounds here, so it's quite, it shows there is something there.
Oh, there's definitely something there. But I mean, okay, so in magic, like I was saying, I do sometimes like put a headscarf over my head to make a tunnel and huff the incense during a ritual. But I'm not doing that regularly. Like, I would say I do that twice a month. And compared to somebody who's, like, smoking 3 packs a day, like, you're not inhaling. Normally with incense, right, we're going to burn a little bit of incense in the entire room. So the air quality right by the incense is poor, but it really spreads out quite a lot. And even if I'm trying, it's pretty hard to fill up a whole room with smoke. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to just pour them into this very sexy and magical plastic bag I brought with me for mixing it. And
There is a little bit of an alarm up there.
Yeah, so don't hold it directly under.
Okay, I'll keep it back here. People can come up here. I'm just kind of see how much of everything I have. So I'm gonna put in roughly equal quantities of everything. but the frankincense is a lot denser. So this is actually going to be a pretty frankincense heavy mix, right? So just to like show people, that's how much frankincense I'm using. Mugwort is quite light, like I was saying, it's quite fluffy. I think I'm going to use not quite all of this. Use about that. So you can see that volume-wise, I use
volume or weight.
Volume. I am measuring right now by volume. I mean, right now I'm just kind of eyeballing it,
Right.
but by volume, I would say I have about twice. I mean, which is not. I mean, weight-wise, I will tell you the weight of this bag barely changed when I put that mugwort in.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I passed it around. You guys can tell the frankincense is much, much heavier, right? And then we're gonna add our blue lotus, which is maybe a little older than it should be. Sad. I feel like cheated me on Blue Lotus. That was less Blue Lotus than I feel like I paid for. Alright, so I'm going to get this started and like crunch it up a little bit. But I'm going to send it around and I really want everybody to like... Okay, while we do this, let's all do a little breathing together, right? So everybody breathe in. And out. In. And out. And as you breathe in, remember that the air you are breathing was breathed out by the trees, and that your exhalations give them life. Right? And that this air you are breathing, it connects you to every living thing on earth. Just a continuous cycle of respiration where we all feed each other. Right? And so as we pass it around, I want everybody who's like feeling good, right, to like pour some good healing vibes in, right? Think about the healing properties of the moon. And if you like maybe need a little bit of healing today, you can pull a little bit out too. Right? And we'll sort of all bring together. And if you want to, as you like feel it, put it in your hand. I would say your left hand, but like you can do you. Right? Just mix it around with your left hand. I'm maybe mixing it more because the Blue Lotus is quite big. It needs to be crunched up a little. Right? But really feel it. And what we're going to do is like everybody can make sort of like their own like moon-related wish, I'm going to say. And let me talk. Okay, so as I pass it around, I'm going to talk a little bit about lunar magic generally. Right? And the sort of things we could be wishing for. But in general, the moon is associated with nighttime and with sleep and with dreaming, and with witch fire. So I'll tell you, if I was going to make a wish for all of you, it would be about, like, igniting our inner witch fire, right? Like, getting our groove back magically. At least I find this time of year a challenging year for me to, like, time of year for me to keep my witch fire up, but I'm straight up nocturnal. Like, I'm a dark dwelling ice queen, basically. Oh, good call. I promise not to burn your store down. Oh yeah, I smell it now. So that is the unpleasant smell of a plastic bag burning. And not the incense we were going for. So I'm going to hand this around. But like, take your time with it and just think about, you know, the moon. And really the moon in all her phases, right? So the full moon that like, it'll clear out in a second, sorry.
Replace it with something else.
Ow. Well, I touched it with my
So
phone.
to understand the moon magic, you can have one or two words that kind of sticks or metaphors.
So for me, the moon would be like dreaming and witching are the two words I would think of, right? But the moon is very much about the subconscious, about the invisible world, right? So like intercourse with spirits. Now obviously different spirits have different associations, but the idea of like dealing with spirit, like the idea of communicating with spirits as a human is generally sort of a lunar activity. The dreaming, inner work, certain kinds of healing, particularly the kinds of healing, like I was saying, that are kind of about chilling things down, right? So the moon is good for like anti-anxiety work, good for like lowering inflammation. When things are like too hot and fast, I'm just shaking my hands around as if that's conveying something to you. But like when things are too hot and fast and you just want to like chill it out, I think lunar magic is generally very good for that. But I would say, for me at least, the core magical use of the moon is in like dreaming and visionary work. It's also really good for female reproductive healing, if your like cycle's out of whack or whatever. It's great for that. It's good for, like I said, certain kinds of like sex work, but not like I want to catch a dick at the club kind of Mars magic, but also not like I want to get married and have babies kind of Venus sex magic, but that kind of like what I think of as the good kind in the middle. Like I want to have some fun, but I also like that person. That sort of category in the middle. But generally anything unseen, anything invisible, dreams, insights, wisdom, those are all sort of lunar qualities, right? And I think of the moon generally as the witch's god, right? Like that's the witch's goddess, the moon. And so like the moon also, just as the moon governs like the tides of the ocean, I think it also like governs the tides of the witch blood within us, right? And I think for everybody, I'll come in a second. Like I think for everybody, like we go through at least for me, but I think for all of us, right? We go through phases where we're really on fire for magic. And then, not that I'm, like, less so, but I'm just tired and a little burned out. I'm, like, chiller. And I feel like the moon is really good in those times for, like, bringing... When I'm too manic, right, the moon kind of chills me out. But when I'm too cold, right, the moon kind of eases the way into that visionary work. Did you have a question? Okay. Any more questions? All right, I'm going to keep talking about the moon.
So when I'm sort of smelling it, that's kind of more Frankenstein.
So the frankincense is definitely, I will say the pitch I put in there was pretty frankincense heavy.
Right, yes,
But
yes.
also the frankincense is going to come through first because it's a resin. So it'll like starts to melt and as soon as it hits the charcoal. And then the mugwort and the lotus are a little bit, they'll come in a little later as the petals.
So there's like a sequence of how they kind of...
Yeah, and so, but also the pinch I put on there had a lot of frankincense in it because I wanted to get rid of that plastic smell. And okay, because resin is actually very close to plastic chemically, like to get rid of a plastic smell, frankincense, like a resin smell will cut through that fast because they're similar. There's always a temptation, I think, to try and like cut a smell with a smell that's very different. But I think you're always better off with a smell that's quite close, but just better. Right? So to get through like that plastic smell, I want a resin smell. To get through maybe like a BO smell, I want something that's like a little bit like musky but pleasant. Whereas if you try and put like, say, a floral smell on top of like hot garbage, it's just going to smell like hot garbage and flowers. Right? But if you put like mugwort, which has a little bit of like kind of a earthy stank, garbagey smell to it, but in a good way, on top, it'll sort of blend in a little better. Right? And like you get a better sort of coverage that way of smells. But yes, this is, I would say what I put on that charcoal is probably 70% frankincense.
Do you ever use incense in a timekeeping manner with your blends about like having the scents come at a different time? I know sometimes in the Japanese idea, like you've got the, as the heat is going around, you've got the different scents that all of a sudden awaken.
So I've seen that. I don't, except in the sense that like I know how different plant materials are going to burn. So I have a sense of like this incense is going to start this way. But like I was saying, what I usually do, the incense coming up behind you. But what I usually do is actually add the ingredients one at a time. Right? So like as I'm going through the smell. So the first thing I would do is like awaken each ingredient. Right? So like to awaken the frankincense, I would like imagine the frankincense spirit, right? Like visually, right? And I would call in the frankincense, like, blessed frankincense, please be with us now, right? And then I would extol the specific virtues of frankincense that I want. I'm kind of like reminding the frankincense what its job is. Like, frankincense, you're here too, blah, 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 which I might do in rhyme, you know, depending how fancy I want to be. For whatever reason, with the whole audience looking at me, I'm like really self-conscious talking to spirits, which I understand is a little silly, right? But like, frankincense, please open the way to the powers of the full moon, the powers of the upper world. Come and be with us now, right? And then Mugwort, Blessed Una, Artemisia, Come and Be With Us Now, Green Spirit of the Wild, Green Spirit of the Middle World, Healing Plant, Teacher Plant, Come and Be With Us Now, Power of the Crescent Moon, blah, 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 right? Blue Lotus, like, opening flower of the moon's waters, right? Birthplace of Ra, opener of the psychic vision, Come and Be With Us Now, right? Power of the dark moon, right? And so you can smell the three together, right? And so once everybody's kind of like got their vibes in, right? We'll burn a little bit of that. And then I've got little bags if people want to come up and fill your own bag. I'm going to ask maybe people to come up and just fill a bag over top of the big bag so we don't make a mess. Because I just suddenly thought about me trying to pour them into bags, and that's going to be a disaster. So I'm going to let everybody pack their own little bag. If you wanted to, like, throw me a couple pounds for incense, you could, as Blue Lotus is kind of bendy. But, I mean, you don't have to. Like, this is my free gift to everyone. I'm just saying if you want to kick in, that's cool. When you come up, you'll see I've got, like, cards for different things. So I'm just going to talk about what's on this table for a second while I wait for the incense to come around. The Fool's Dog is the market-leading digital publisher of digital tarot decks. This is our beautiful CTO, Jess Robinson here. We've just pushed a new update like a week ago. QR code on the back for a free download. I mean, the download's actually always free whether you use this QR code or not, but it's got a QR code. My new book, Introduction to Witchcraft, will be out at Halloween. It is a course you can take. You can take the course now, but book will be out at Halloween. I asked my publisher for a cover that made it look like this book was from an alternate reality where witchcraft was a kind of physics, and I feel like they really nailed it. I love this cover. I got hate mail about that book cover. Wow. Like, I showed it off, and I'm in a, like, just writers group on Facebook, and people were like, your publisher did you dirty, that is terrible. And I cannot imagine a book that would make me make hate mail about it, so, like, I think that's good. I think they wanted it to be pink with a deer skull and a flower crown like every other. And they're like, I'm your target market. I'm like, oh, honey, you are not my target market, I assure you, if you think that. Sorcery of Solomon, I talked about here last year. I'm going to imagine you guys have some copies of that. Do you have copies of that? We have copies of that here. That is about the 44 planetary pentacles. At some point, I'm going to imagine New Year's, I have another book on Sefer HaOtot, which is a Hebrew book of seals. Fun fact, that's what Sefer HaOtot means, book of seals. Book of the seals, I suppose. So they are Mather's-style pentacles from a Hebrew manuscript. When I started this project, I was under the impression that this Hebrew manuscript represented an older tradition of pentacles from which these had been come, but I no longer believe that. I believe it was written by Judah Perez, who was a Sephardic Kabbalist living in London. He was a sorcerer. Okay, I assume that I'm going to maybe put this out. It's getting pretty, I can like see it sort of moving toward the smoke detector.
It would be a nice end, wouldn't it?
Maybe I'm going to put it out for real. Yeah, it'd be a very dramatic way to end a book talk by setting the smoke detectors off. So Sefer HaOtot is currently with my editor, David Rankine, at Hadean. It will be out, I don't know when. Judah Perez was a sorcerer and a Kabbalist, a suspected Sabbatean. If you don't know what that means, then I guess I'll come back at some point and do a talk on Sabbateanism. But I'm pretty sure he actually composed it at this point. I don't think he is copying from somewhere. Let me say this. My position that this book was written by Judah Perez is based on the fact that it says it was written by a Judah Perez, and there was a Jewish Kabbalistic sorcerer living in London named Judah Perez at the time this book was written, and I feel like it was probably him. But I cannot actually prove that he wrote it in any kind of like I learned that from a ghost and not from university research. But how many Judah Perez's could there be? Spoiler, a lot. I know it doesn't seem like Perez is a Jewish name, but that's a very common Sephardic name. So that'll be out, I think, probably New Year. I don't know, it's with the editor now. I imagine that'll be out around New Year's. And I have pamphlets for Orphic Hymns Grimoire, which I think you guys are out of. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah, sad. I would have brought some if I knew that. So you can't buy that here, but you can buy it anywhere else books are sold, and I'm sure they will happily order you some copies if you would like. And I think it has the Orphic Hymn 2 Phanes on the back. Who's on the back? Let's see. Protagonos. Who is Phanes? Lucifer. Protagonos is a Greek name for Lucifer. So if you guys want to come up and grab some incense, you can do that. I'm happy to talk. I can sign books here, or is there somewhere upstairs?
We can sign them.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, then I am happy to sign them here. What I don't have is a pen, though.
I got one.
So if somebody gives me a pen.